Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When ex-military engineer Jack Jacobs built his off-grid fortress in the Oregon woods, he thought the wildest threat would be a rogue bear, not a ruthless HOA led by a clipboard-wielding tyrant. But when they cross his fence, they ignite a war they never saw coming. The line is drawn. I always figured if trouble ever found me again, it'd come from a busted hydraulic line or maybe a pissed-off moose in the Oregon backwoods, not a pack of entitled suburbanites with clipboards and superiority complexes. But here we are. It all started 2 months after I finished building the gate. Not just any gate, a 12-foot steel-reinforced double swing barrier flanked by concrete pylons topped with custom-welded spikes. Add in motion detectors, a full perimeter camera system, and a 10-foot privacy fence that wraps around all 6 acres of my woodland property. And, yeah, it's a fortress. A legal one, too. Everything built to code, permits in order, nothing out of line. I triple-checked the deed when I bought this place. No easements, no restrictions, and most importantly, not under any HOA jurisdiction. That was non-negotiable. After 20 years in the military dealing with red tape, I wasn't about to let a bunch of bored busybodies tell me what color to paint my garage. I moved out here for quiet, space, freedom. I've got a steel workshop, a hangar-turned lab, and a 2-story timber frame cabin I built out with my own damn hands. The land was dense and raw when I bought it, and I liked it that way. Still do. So imagine my confusion when the first letter showed up. A glossy envelope with a gold-embossed return address, Crescent Ridge Community Council. Sounded fancier than your average HOA, which should have been my first clue. Inside was a neatly typed letter informing me, cordially requesting me to reconsider the height and visual tone of my perimeter fencing as it disrupts the cohesive visual harmony of the Crescent Ridge community. I damn near spit out my coffee. I live outside the community, literally. Their property line ends about 30 feet before my eastern boundary. I'm not part of Crescent Ridge, never have been, never will be. So I tossed the letter in the trash and moved on with my day. 2 days later, a second letter came, this one a bit more insistent. It claimed there was ongoing internal review to determine whether adjacent parcels, including mine, may fall under Crescent Ridge's jurisdiction per boundary reinterpretation standards introduced in 2019. I didn't even know what the hell that meant. I've seen bureaucratic BS in 5 languages and 3 continents, but this took the prize. Boundary reinterpretation? What next? HOA eminent domain. I responded the way any sane person would. I ignored it. Then came the drone. I was out back, working on retrofitting a hydraulic pivot arm for my shop door when I heard the buzz. Not the usual cicada buzz or tree sap popping under the heat. This was digital, mechanical. I looked up just in time to see a white quadcopter hovering maybe 10 feet above my property line. It had no markings, but the damn thing was inching closer, tilting its lens toward my shop like it was casing the place. I grabbed a wrench and waved it, trying to shoo it away. No luck. So I went inside, pulled out a tool I'd saved from a military clearance auction, a portable signal disruptor, and gave that nosy little bird a headache. 30 seconds later, it dropped like a brick into my gravel drive, bounced once, and cracked open like a cheap toy. No surprise, the inside was stamped with a sticker. Property of Crescent Ridge Community Patrol. Patrol. Like they're a sovereign nation or something. I photographed the wreckage, bagged the parts, and threw the rest in my storage unit. The message was clear. I was being watched. Over the next week, the letters kept coming. Each one a little more formal, a little more aggressive. One claimed I had failed to submit design approval requests for my outbuildings. Another insisted I adhere to Crescent Ridge aesthetic standards under Section B, Community Visual Guidelines, which would be hilarious if it weren't so insane. There is no Section B for me. My land is not, has never been, and will never be part of their Stepford dream world. Still, the implication was obvious. They weren't going to stop. Then, neighbors started acting strange. Not my kind of neighbors. Mine are deer, owls, and the occasional bear. But the humans living behind their coded gates across the access road, they began eyeing me like I was the one intruding. A few stopped returning my waves. One guy even reversed his car rather than drive past me on the public access trail. Word was spreading, and I had no doubt who was spreading it. Karen Miller. I'd never met her in person, but I knew her name. president of the Crescent Ridge HOA. Widowed, late 50s, surgically preserved face with a frozen smile in every photo I could find. Apparently, she ran the HOA like a private militia with her son Troy, tagging along as the self-proclaimed security coordinator. Translation, grown man with too much time and zero authority. I tried to let it slide. I really did. But when you've spent most of your adult life designing security systems in places where actual bombs were involved, you develop a twitch when people start testing your boundaries. Literally. So I went back to my files, pulled the original land survey, the recorded plat map, the deed transfer notarized by a state-licensed official, all clean, all legal, no servitudes, no obligations, and especially no Crescent Ridge oversight. I scanned everything, printed fresh copies, and filed the originals in a fireproof safe because I had a sinking feeling that a storm was coming, and it wasn't going to be solved with letters. I met Karen Miller on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and self-righteousness. I was tightening a hinge bolt on the southern gate when a white SUV rolled up the gravel access road and stopped just beyond the fence. The license plate frame read Crescent Ridge Community Watch, which already told me everything I needed to know. Out stepped Karen herself, blonde bob so stiff it could deflect bullets, sunglasses the size of saucers, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like a sidearm. Behind her, a man I assumed was her son Troy climbed out, mid-30s buzz cut, wearing tactical cargo pants and a polo with a fake security badge. Another guy sat in the back seat, holding a tablet and looking confused about why he was there. "Good morning," Karen chirped, voice dripping with the kind of politeness that always precedes a lawsuit. "I'm Karen Miller, president of Crescent Ridge. You must be Mr. Jacobs." I wiped my hands on a rag. "That's me. Can I help you with something?" "Yes, actually," she said, pulling a glossy map from her clipboard. "It seems there's been some confusion about community boundaries. You see, our board recently conducted a reassessment of the outer parcels, and it appears your property line may fall within our expanded jurisdiction." I couldn't help but laugh. "That's a creative way of saying you want my land." Karen didn't even blink. "Not want, Mr. Jacobs, manage. We're simply ensuring all properties adhere to our shared standards. You've erected structures that are, how shall I put it, non-compliant with Crescent Ridge's aesthetic expectations." Her son stepped forward, puffing out his chest like a mall cop. "This gate's too tall," he said, knocking on the metal. 10 feet, maybe more. Code says 6. "County code says 10's fine for private property," I replied. "And you don't have jurisdiction here." Troy frowned, looking back at his mother for confirmation. She smiled tightly. "Mr. Jacobs, we understand your confusion. Many homeowners don't realize that Crescent Ridge has an obligation to maintain security and uniformity. As residents of the Greater Ridge community—" "I'm not a resident of anything greater than my own fence," I interrupted. "And unless you've got a court order, I'm going to ask you to step off my property." Her smile cracked just a little. "You don't have to be hostile." "I'm being polite," I said, pressing the control key on my remote. The gate slid shut between us with a clean mechanical hum. "You'll know if I'm hostile." They left eventually, but not before Troy took a dozen photos of my gate and fence, muttering something about reporting violations. 2 days later, I learned what that meant. When I woke that Thursday, the first thing I noticed was silence where there should have been the steady whir of my security feed. Cameras offline, motion sensors dead. Then I saw the gate, ripped open like a tin can. The locking mechanism had been sawed clean through. I replayed the footage from my internal hard drive, the system stored locally, thank God, and there it was. Troy and 2 men in Crescent Ridge polos, cutting the chain with an angle grinder and walking right through like they owned the place. They strolled around my yard, peeked into my workshop windows, even filmed my truck. The timestamp read 3 in the morning. I didn't call Karen, I called the sheriff. Deputies arrived within an hour. I showed them the footage, gave them a copy of my deed, and explained that these people had broken in under the pretense of community inspection. The older deputy, a guy named Harlan, watched the screen and sighed. "I've seen some HOA nonsense in my day," he muttered, "but this takes the cake. We'll talk to them." They did more than talk. 2 patrol cars rolled into Crescent Ridge that afternoon. I stood at my driveway and watched as officers walked Karen and Troy out of their fancy clubhouse for a friendly discussion. 20 minutes later, the deputies came back. "They're claiming they thought this was community property," Harlan told me. "Said you were refusing maintenance access." "Maintenance for what?" I asked. He shrugged. Beats me. They're not charged yet, but they've been warned. One more stunt like this, and they'll face trespassing charges. I thanked him, though part of me knew this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't stop because the law said so. They stopped when the humiliation outweighed the thrill of control. Sure enough, that evening, an email hit my inbox from Crescent Ridge Legal Liaison. It read, per Section D of the Community Standards, residents obstructing community access routes may face penalties. You are urged to remove non-compliant barriers immediately. They still didn't get it. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the video freeze frame on my monitor. Troy, face half hidden behind his sunglasses, cutting through my chain at 3 in the damn morning. I smiled. I'd dealt with worse. And I had something they didn't, patience, proof, and a very secure fence. If they wanted a fight, they just declared it. After that break-in, something in me flipped. I wasn't just irritated anymore. I was done. You don't cut through a man's gate in the middle of the night and walk away with a warning. That kind of violation sinks into your bones. It makes the air feel thinner on your own damn land. And I wasn't about to let it happen again. So I started reinforcing. First came the new gates, 2 of them actually, one at the main access road and a secondary set where the old service trail split off toward the woods. Both were hydraulic, double-arm RFID based and paired to a dual authentication entry system I'd been tinkering with since my last DoD contract. No keypad, no clicker. If you didn't have my authorization token embedded in your windshield tag, those gates weren't budging. I installed radar-based motion detectors on all approaches, calibrated to ignore deer, but pick up vehicles and bipeds. I rewired the entire camera grid to feed directly into an encrypted solid-state server in my basement, powered by a backup solar array and a hidden gas generator. Then I activated lockdown mode, a custom sequence I designed that, when triggered, shut every gate, locked every entrance, and alerted me via a silent push to my phone. I called it Fortress Mode. It had never seen use before, until now. 3 days after the upgrades, I was sitting in my workshop when the perimeter alert pinged. Someone had pulled up to the main gate. I walked over to the monitor and, well, would you look at that? Karen and Troy. Karen was in her usual I'm better than you getup, cashmere shawl, pressed khakis, a tablet in hand like it was the HOA Bible. Troy was pacing beside her truck, puffed up and visibly agitated, as if he'd been locked out of the Pentagon. He tried pressing buttons on the access panel, which, of course, did absolutely nothing. Then he banged on it with his fist. Through the intercom, I heard Karen's voice, muffled but loud enough. This is unacceptable. This is a public access road, and you're impeding community flow. I clicked the mic. No, ma'am. This is a federal rural access route, not maintained by your HOA, and everything behind this gate is my land, including the air you're yelling into. She turned toward the camera, lips pursed so tightly I thought she'd implode. You are interfering with neighborhood coordination and communal access. You will open these gates immediately or face legal consequences. I smiled. Then I suggest you call your lawyer or your therapist. Troy stepped forward, waving his phone. We're calling the cops. Right now. Please do, I replied. Be sure to tell them what you're trespassing on this time. I shut off the mic and watched them stand there for another minute, gesturing at the gate like they could shout it into submission. Then, sure enough, Troy started dialing. I leaned back in my chair, half amused, half disgusted. This idiot was actually calling 911 because he couldn't get through my locked gate onto my property, on a road that doesn't even belong to them. I knew Oregon law. I knew the county land division maps. Hell, I had built this damn place to be legally bulletproof. But here they were, still convinced that fantasy trumped fact. 15 minutes later, the alert pinged again. 2 police cruisers were pulling up behind Karen's truck. I headed outside, printed copies of all my docs again, and tucked them under my arm. I didn't need to win this round. I just needed to watch them lose it. The cops rolled up with lights off, but you could still feel the weight of the cruisers as they crunched down my gravel approach. 2 cars, county plates, one with a younger officer I didn't recognize, and the other with Deputy Harlan, same guy who came out after the first break-in. I was already waiting by the gate with my folder under one arm and a mug of coffee in the other. Karen was mid-sentence, her voice shrill enough to cut glass. Troy stood beside her, waving his arms like he was directing air traffic. This is a hostile situation, he barked. He locked the neighborhood out. You have to make him open the gate. This is entrapment. Harlan stepped out of his cruiser, face unreadable. He looked at me, then at them, then at the gate, then back at Troy like he was trying to decide whether this was a prank or a social experiment gone wrong. "All right," he said, real slow, like he was talking to toddlers and was running out of juice. "Let's walk this through. You called 911 and because this man closed a gate on his own property?" Karen stepped forward. "He has constructed an illegal barrier on a shared access road." "It's not shared," I cut in calmly, holding up my folder. "Rural access route. County-maintained easement ends 25 feet from my gate. Everything beyond that, including the dirt it's bolted into, is mine." I handed the deputy the documents. Deed, parcel map, survey report, signed and notarized. Karen tried to interrupt, but Harlan lifted one hand. "Let me read before we start yelling." The other officer, a young guy with a buzz cut and the energy of someone new enough to still care, wandered toward Troy. "Sir," he asked, "did you cross onto this property today?" "No," Troy said too quickly. "I mean earlier this week. Cameras picked up an incident." I thought we had the right," Troy stammered. "My mom said it was part of our community's expansion map." Harlan looked up at that. "Expansion map?" Karen jumped in. "We're in the process of redefining our HOA jurisdiction to include surrounding properties. This area used to be connected before zoning splits were finalized. We're simply reclaiming what was originally meant to be part of Crescent Ridge." Harlan glanced at me. "Any record of that?" I pointed to a highlighted section in the map. "Here's the original boundary line. Crescent Ridge ends 32 feet away from my gate. No easements, no shared anything, just me, the trees, and the law." The younger deputy leaned into his mic. "Dispatch, can you confirm land records for parcel ID Alpha 47B? Static. Then a crackle. "Confirmed. Private property. No HOA affiliation." Harlan exhaled, handed back my folder, and turned to Troy. "You seriously called 911 because your neighbor locked his own gate?" Troy blinked. "We thought. He made it impossible to check the perimeter. What if there was a fire or something? Then the fire department would bust the gate. That's how gates work." Karen looked like she was trying to melt into her scarf. Troy's face had gone pale, then red, then something between both. The younger deputy pulled him aside for a quiet talk. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language said everything. Defensive hands, shifting feet, the subtle flinch of embarrassment blooming behind his sunglasses. Then, something I didn't expect. Troy's shoulders slumped, and he wiped his face with the back of his hand. Was he crying? I heard his voice crack. "I didn't mean to cause a problem. I thought we were doing what was right. She said it was ours. She said he was lying." Karen glared at him like he'd just kicked her poodle into traffic. "I didn't lie," I said quietly. "You just picked the wrong neighbor to bully." Harlan stepped between us. "All right, this is over. Mr. Jacobs, you're in the clear. No further action. And you," he turned to Karen and Troy, "pull another stunt like this, and you're looking at criminal trespass and false emergency reporting." "Understood." Karen nodded stiffly. Troy kept his eyes on the ground. As they turned to leave, Karen hissed something to her son. I didn't catch it all, but I caught one word: lawsuit. I smiled, raised my coffee, and added just loud enough for them to hear, "Better bring more than a clipboard next time." After that little circus in my driveway, I decided it was time to stop playing defense. No more waiting for them to screw up again. They already had multiple times, and I had it all on video. It was time to hit back. Legally, hard. I called up a lawyer I knew from my contracting days. Marsh 11, former federal prosecutor with a personality like a buzzsaw and zero patience for stupidity. When I told her about the drone, the break-in, the false 911 call, her first response was, "Tell me you kept the footage." I sent her the files within the hour. She called me back 10 minutes later, laughing. "Oh, honey," she said, "this is better than I hoped. We're not just going for a restraining order, we're going to bury them." First move, we filed a civil suit in county court. Charges included unlawful trespass, destruction of private property, and malicious harassment. Then Marcia added a line item for intentional infliction of emotional distress, not because I needed the sympathy, but because she knew the language would make any HOA lawyer twitch. Next, I hired an independent engineer, old guy named Len with 50 years of welding experience, to assess the damage to my gate. He inspected the torch cuts, ran stress tests on the support hinges, and wrote a full report estimating replacement and labor costs at just over $50,000. Marcia stapled that to the complaint like a cherry on top. I figured that was enough to keep me busy. But the next twist came from a source I didn't expect. One of the residents of Crescent Ridge, a guy named Michael Whitby, reached out through email. Said he was a retired real estate broker and tired of the HOA madness. Apparently, he'd lived under Karen's reign for over a decade and watched the association get progressively more aggressive under her rule. But what really caught my attention was this. Karen's been meeting with developers. She's trying to position Crescent Ridge for a major expansion project. Your land blocks their eastern corridor. If they can't get it, the whole deal collapses. Suddenly, it all made sense. All that crap about visual harmony and communal oversight, it wasn't about appearances. It was about money. My land, 6 acres of wooded high ground, was in the way of a planned development project Karen was trying to ram through. She wasn't enforcing the rules. She was paving the road for a payout. Michael even forwarded me a confidential memo that had been circulated during a closed HOA board meeting, a long-term land acquisition strategy. My address was highlighted. My parcel was labeled non-compliant holdout. They'd already assumed I'd fold. When I showed that document to Marcia, she nearly choked on her coffee. "They just gift-wrapped your motive," she said. "This isn't a nuisance suit anymore. This is textbook land coercion. If we connect the dots, this could trigger an investigation." We did more than connect them. Marcia filed a supplemental brief with the court, attaching the memo as evidence of malicious intent. Then she submitted a formal complaint to the county district attorney's office, alleging HOA overreach, harassment, and potential document fraud. Meanwhile, Crescent Ridge went into full damage control mode. I started seeing flyers appear at the edge of my property. Anonymous stuff like warning, unfriendly resident creating hazards, or unsafe structures in violation of code. None of it signed, but all clearly targeting me. Then came the real kicker. A week later, Karen's lawyer emailed Marcia a scanned copy of an alleged inclusion agreement, a document that supposedly showed my parcel had once voluntarily joined Crescent Ridge, years before I bought it. The signature on it claimed to belong to the previous owner. I called him. Walter Temple, retired farmer in Idaho, nice guy. I'd spoken to him briefly when I bought the place. This time, he was pissed. "I never signed anything like that," he said. HOA tried to rope me in back in the early 2000s, but I told them to go pound sand. If they've got my name on something, it's a fake. That's all I needed to hear. Marcia immediately petitioned the court to conduct a forensic analysis of the document. We submitted samples of Walter's verified signature from the title transfer and the notary log from the sale. The court approved the request, and the judge appointed a handwriting expert and a document chemist. They got to work, and I started planning the next layer of my defense, because if they were willing to forge a contract to steal my land, they'd try worse before this was over. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m., but I got there at 7:30. Marcia was already in the courthouse parking lot, leaning against her car with a takeaway coffee in one hand and a folder thicker than the Crescent Ridge bylaws in the other. "They're walking in today, thinking they're the prosecution," she said with a grin. "Let's remind them they're the defendants." We walked into that courtroom, calm and collected. Across the aisle sat Karen, perfectly shellacked in some kind of pastel power suit, her lips drawn into a tight, confident line. Troy was with her, squirming like he needed to use the bathroom. Their lawyer looked like the kind of guy who charged by the comma. The judge was a sharp woman in her 60s with a voice that could sand drywall. As soon as the hearing began, Karen's lawyer rose and tried to pull the rug out from under us. "Your Honor," he began, oozing sincerity, "we present this document as evidence that the parcel in question was, in fact, voluntarily joined to the Crescent Ridge community via a signed agreement in 2003. This contract predates Mr. Jacobs' ownership and places the land within the jurisdiction of the HOA." He handed the judge a copy with a flourish. The room went quiet. I didn't say a word, just handed Marcia our folder. She stood slowly, like a cat stretching before a kill. "Your Honor," she said, "we request that this document be struck from the record pending the outcome of a forensic investigation currently in progress." The judge arched an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "Forgery," Marcia said bluntly. "Our client contacted the previous owner of the property, Mr. Walter Temple, who provided sworn testimony that he never signed any such agreement. Additionally, with the court's permission, we submitted the document for chemical and handwriting analysis." She held up the lab reports. Both experts concluded the following. First, the ink used in the signature contains pigment compounds that were not manufactured until after 2018. Second, the paper stock does not match standard legal documents from that period and contains optical brighteners found in modern printer paper, typically sold in bulk office supply stores. Third, the signature does not match Mr. Temple's verified handwriting from official state records. In short, this document is fake. Karen's lawyer objected. He sputtered something about misplaced originals and archival degradation, but the judge waved him off. Are you telling this court that your client has submitted a forged document as evidence? Marcia didn't even blink. Yes, Your Honor, we are. The judge turned her gaze to Karen. Mrs. Miller, do you understand the implications of this? Karen shifted in her seat but didn't respond. Then Marcia dropped the hammer. Furthermore, she continued, we've obtained a leaked internal HOA memo referencing this property as a non-compliant holdout in a broader real estate development initiative. There is strong circumstantial evidence that this forged contract was created not out of administrative error, but as part of a deliberate attempt to pressure Mr. Jacobs into surrendering his land for Crescent Ridge's planned eastern expansion. The judge's jaw tightened. This court will not tolerate fraud, she said. Pending further review, this document is disqualified as evidence. The matter of forgery will be referred to the county prosecutor's office for criminal investigation. Karen finally opened her mouth. It was just a copy, she stammered. We couldn't find the original. You thought wrong, the judge snapped. And if I find out you knowingly submitted forged evidence, you're looking at felony charges. Troy, to his credit, looked like he was about to vomit. After court adjourned, I stepped outside and took a deep breath of air that finally felt mine again. Marcia joined me with a grin. Congratulations. You just turned this from a property dispute into a criminal case. I nodded, still holding the lab report in my hand. Think they'll try something else? She laughed. They're too busy trying to cover their asses. But it's not over. Not yet. We just took the high ground. Now we hold it. I went home and poured myself a whiskey. Let them squirm. I'd waited long enough to watch them burn. The headlines came faster than I expected. HOA under investigation after forged documents. Surface and land dispute. Exclusive expansion deal linked to HOA. President collapses amid scandal. Private landowner exposes HOA overreach in explosive lawsuit for a man who wanted nothing more than peace and trees. I was becoming a symbol for pissed-off property owners statewide. I didn't ask for that role, but I sure as hell wasn't going to waste it. Marcia kept her foot on the gas. With the forged contract disqualified and the court recognizing Crescent Ridge's harassment campaign as targeted and unlawful, she pushed for a full review of the HOA's internal documents. The judge granted it. A court-appointed auditor got access to their board minutes, correspondence, financial records, all of it. That's when the rot came spilling out. Turns out the forged document wasn't a one-off. Crescent Ridge had been quietly attempting to reinterpret boundary lines for nearly 2 years, using sketchy visual overlays and vague language to nudge independent homeowners into community compliance. They had redrawn maps, sent out unofficial notices dressed up like legal documents, and even issued citations to people who never consented to be part of their HOA. One guy, a veteran like me, had paid almost $4,000 in bogus fines over a span of 6 months just to shut them up. Another family had torn down their shed because Karen told them it violated a rule they weren't actually subject to. It was a pattern, and once the DA's office got involved, that pattern became a case file. Karen was subpoenaed. So was Troy. So was half the board. Then came the public hearing. They held it at the county administration building in a room with tall ceilings, bad microphones, and an audience of about 50 local residents, reporters, and homeowners from across the region. I sat near the back with Marcia, arms folded, watching Karen take the stand like she was still the queen of a kingdom that didn't exist anymore. She tried to play the martyr. I only ever wanted to improve the community, to protect property values, to create unity. The prosecutor asked her one question. Did you sign off on the submission of a forged contract to the court? She hesitated. That was enough. Legally, it meant the game was over. The DA filed formal charges: criminal fraud, attempted coercion, submission of false documents, and conspiracy to misuse an HOA charter for personal financial gain. And that's where the other shoe dropped. Remember that expansion plan? the one Karen had been orchestrating behind the scenes. Yeah, the whole deal hinged on proving that my parcel could be incorporated into Crescent Ridge. Investors had already earmarked funding for new infrastructure, utilities, even luxury homes. But with the contract tossed out and the scandal in full blaze, the investor group pulled out. Publicly, the entire expansion collapsed like a drunk leaning on a rotten fence. To make matters worse for Karen, the court ruled in my civil case too. Verdict in my favor on all counts. Damages awarded $515,000. That included compensatory damages for the destroyed gate, legal costs, emotional distress, and a fat chunk of punitive damages tied to the forgery attempt. But the part that really landed was this. The judge issued a binding court order for the partial dissolution of Crescent Ridge HOA's authority. Any parcels outside their original founding boundary were declared off-limits. Any future expansion would require unanimous consent from those involved, not just a sneaky vote in a wine-soaked HOA boardroom. And Karen, she was barred from holding any leadership position in any registered HOA or residential council for the next 10 years. She was ordered to attend mandatory ethics training. She didn't even make eye contact as the ruling was read. Troy stood in the hallway afterward looking like a broken man. He didn't say a word to me as I passed. I didn't stop either. No smug remark, no victory speech. I'd already won. You know what's funny? I built that gate to keep wildlife out. Maybe the occasional trespasser. I never expected it would become a symbol, not just of ownership, but of everything I'd fought to protect. The morning after the final ruling, I welded a plaque onto the inside of the main gate. It's a simple brushed steel plate mounted right above the keypad. I etched it myself, steady-handed with a plasma cutter I hadn't used since my last military contract. It reads, "Open to respect, closed to those who can't respect others' rights." I didn't post it for Karen, or Troy, or the board members now crying foul in HOA forums. I posted it for me, and for the next person like me, the one who just wanted to be left the hell alone and was told that wasn't allowed. A month passed. I got a check in the mail, the first installment of the court-ordered damages, a thin envelope thick with meaning. Most people would have taken it as a reason to celebrate. Me? I bought steel, lots of it. I used the funds to expand my shop, installed a new line of CNC machines, and upgraded my software license. But the real change wasn't the tools. It was the business model. I launched Hardline Consulting, private property defense systems, specialized legal consulting, fence, gate, and security installations for folks dealing with HOA abuse, zoning thuggery, or neighbor overreach. Word spread fast. I didn't even advertise. People just found me, sometimes with blueprints, sometimes with tears. Always with stories that sounded too familiar. One woman from Southern Oregon showed up with drone footage of her HOA using motion lights to harass her disabled son. Another guy drove in from the valley with a folder full of fake violations written in Comic Sans. I helped them all, not because I wanted to be some freedom-fighting folk hero, but because it felt right. Because I knew exactly how it felt to be gaslit by fake authority. Because the law doesn't always come with a badge. Sometimes it comes with welds, hard copies, and backup footage. As for Crescent Ridge, they're still there. Smaller, quieter, meaner in a passive-aggressive sort of way. Half their board resigned. A third of the homes went up for sale after the ruling. Karen sold her house 32 days after the verdict. Market took a hit after the news coverage. She left town without fanfare. Rumor is she's in Nevada now, renting. Troy, no one's seen him since. Last I heard, he tried starting some kind of neighborhood response network online, but it got flagged for misinformation and shut down. I don't hate them. Really, I don't. People like that don't start out evil. They just get used to control, then addicted to it, then desperate. Karen didn't lose her mind because I put up a fence. She lost it because the fence reminded her that she didn't own everything. There's something deeply unsettling to those types about boundaries. The idea that not everything is theirs to touch, to fix, to manage. But me, I sleep just fine now. The coyotes still pass by at night. The trees still creak in the wind. The gates still hum when they close. Clean and quiet and absolute. And I stand by the plaque every time I open them, just to remind myself that this land is mine. Every inch of it earned, every gate defended, and every battle worth it.